Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Sabine. Today's video is going to be about the things you need, absolutely, when you start quilting and things that you don't. But the catch is we're going to talk about the same types of things that you need at different price points. So it's going to be like, yes, you need this thing, but no, you don't need all the bells and whistles of this thing when you get started. That way, no matter what budget you're at, whether you're ready to upgrade or not, you know when it's time for you to maybe consider that and kind of know what it is that you might be spending for the different levels and quality of things. All right, so we are going to start with the sewing machine. Now, what is critical for you to have in a sewing machine is going to be one that functions and you know how to use. That's it. So if you have a Kenmore from the 1970s that you've had recently cleaned and serviced so that you know that it's functioning and you know how to use it, that's fine. You don't have to run out and get a brand new fancy machine. You can use that until you decide that, yes, this is for me, or no, it's not. If it's something that's been sitting around and collecting dust since the 1970s, definitely take that in for a cleaning. But I guarantee you cleaning that machine is going to be less expensive than getting a quality new machine. So it's definitely worth doing that first before you get started and then seeing how you feel about it and if you're ready to upgrade later. Now, once you upgrade, there's going to be different levels of price points for you. When I started, my grandparents got me a Singer sewing machine from a big box store when I was about 15, and it was super, super basic. And Singer, while like you can still find Singer featherweights from the early 19th century that will still work perfectly for you if they're clean and serviced, the newer Singers are not built the same way. A lot of the parts are plastic and a lot of them are not the best quality parts. And especially when you're talking about machines that are going to be in the $100 to $200 price point, those are not meant to last for a decade the way some of the older Singers and some of the older antique machines have. So what you kind of have to look at it as, you should get your machine cleaned and serviced about every 6 months to a year, depending on how much you use it and how good of a job you do cleaning it out in between sewing projects. And that's just to get all the gunk out that you're not going to be able to reach on your own. And a cleaning service fee is going to be anywhere from $75 to $150 for most places. It depends on where you live and what your current local place charges you for that. But if you bought a machine for $100, it's not really worth getting it cleaned and serviced for $150. So those machines are basically, they call them throwaway machines, where they're meant to be used until they break, and then you don't fix them, you just get another one because it's not worth fixing it. Sometimes you can pay more to fix it than you did for the machine in the first place, which is exactly what happened to my original Singer. It did break. I did pay for it to be fixed, and then I upgraded myself and gave that machine to my mom, who later upgraded and gave it to my sister. So it is still living its best life, but it is pulled out on very rare occasions by somebody who doesn't, consider this their number one hobby that they do all the time. The other thing about those really like low-end throwaway machines is that a lot of times you might be getting really frustrated with them because it's behaving badly. It'll do things like create thread nests underneath your stitching. There'll be tension problems, even though you know you got it threaded right. And also you can have tension issues where your fabric bunches up on you. There's a whole host of issues that come with having one of those throwaway machines. And a lot of times it can be really frustrating, especially if you are a new quilter, because I know that I found that to be the case when I was using my original machine. And it just is the machine's problem and not yours. If you try it out on a higher level machine, you are not going to have those same issues and you're going to be able to sew with much less frustration. So once you're ready to upgrade to a machine that is going to work better for you, there are a couple of different price points that you want to be. So I'm going to show you a level of sewing machine that is great once you're ready to upgrade, either from your antique machine that has been cleaned and serviced but maybe isn't doing everything you want it to do, and or your throwaway machine. This is a really good one to check out. Now, I love baby locks. It's all I sew with. but I'm not paid to say that. I don't have any kind of a deal with Baby Lock. I would love to have one if Baby Lock is watching this, but they're great machines. My original one still works 13 years after I purchased it, so it is fantastic. It's a great machine. And they have a lot of different price points too that you can look at depending on what your budget is. We have a couple of these at the shop that we use when we're making our samples, so it works really well. It's the Baby Lock Jubilant, and it retails for $599. And the biggest thing is not what brand you go with or what level you go with. The biggest thing when you're looking for a sewing machine to purchase is that you can purchase it locally from a shop that is both going to offer classes to teach you how to use it, be able to clean, service, and fix it if there's a problem, and be able to help you troubleshoot locally by either calling them or bringing your machine in for a quick little, what is going on with the machine? I don't know why this is working. So this is definitely something that is not to be purchased online. As much as we are an online shop, we depend on you buying stuff from us online. This is not a one that you want to do. You want to make sure you have someone local that you can go to when you need help. So that is the number one thing. Why I like this machine is the price point is really great for entry level. It is at $5.99. You are going to be above the level of machines where they're going to give you problems, but you can still get some great features. The feed dogs are a little bit wider, so it's going to be feeding that fabric through better. You're not going to have problems with bunching or threadness or it eating your fabric when you put it in initially. There's lots of stitches that come with it, like a 1/4 inch stitch. And you can also do zigzags. You can do overlocking stitches. If you want to do garments, you can do a stretch stitch if you want to try sewing with knits. There's lots of options, probably more than you will ever use. It's not a huge throat space, but that's okay. It totally will work, and it's a really good place to be. Now, there are Baby Locks that are at a lower price point than this, but this is where I would start. If you're looking to upgrade, this one works really, really well, and you're not going to have problems with it. Now, this machine is not sold anymore. This is a Baby Lock Quilter's Choice. I purchased this 13 years ago after I got my first home, and I was ready to upgrade. So this is the one that I upgraded from my throwaway Singer to this one, and it has been serviced and cleaned and repaired with regularity. It hasn't needed too many repairs, just a couple. Most of the time when there have been problems with this machine, it's been my own fault, not the machine's fault. But this thing is still going strong after 13 years, and the equivalent of it in today's available machines is the Baby Lock Soprano, and that is $2,499. So quite a big jump, but there's a lot of extra stuff that you get when you go to a machine like that. Number one, you're going to have a bigger throat space in here, which means you're going to be able to quilt up to a lap quilt on your home sewing machine without it being too difficult. Lap to twin, and being able to do things like free motion quilting stitches and things like that. It also is going to come with a whole lot of feet, more than you're going to need to do all your free motion and your walking foot quilting. It comes with a extension tables to help give you more weight distributed when you're quilting on your home sewing machine, and it has a ton of stitches, including ones that you can pre-program, so you can do things like embroider your labels. It's not technically embroidery stitch, but it looks like it for your quilt labels, and put your name on that. So a way I look at it when deciding whether to go with the $5.99 versus the $24.99 is thinking about how much quilts am I going to actually quilt on my home sewing machine. At the time that I bought this one, I was quilting everything on my home sewing machine. So to look at that and know that it's like probably $200 to get a decent quilting on a mid-sized quilt, that's 10 quilts basically between the price of the other one and here. So if you want to learn to quilt quilts on your home sewing machine and you want to really do that and develop those skills, then think of it as the machine would pay for itself after 10 quilts of doing it on your home sewing machine. So that is a really good deal when you look at it that way. But not everybody likes to finish their quilts on their home sewing machine, and so maybe you would be better off with the $5.99 model. So that's basically the only reason why I would spring for the more expensive one, is if I'm planning on doing a lot of quilting on my home sewing machine. There are levels in between. One feature that's great to have is an automatic thread cutter. So once you get to that level, that's great. I remember when I was deciding between this one and the model below, I ended up going with this one because it came with that extension table. It came with all the feet I needed. And by the time I would have paid for those with the level below it, it would have been the same price, and I had smaller throat space, so it wouldn't have been as good for free motion quilting. So these are all things that you can take in consideration when you're deciding what sewing machine you want to go with. But just know you do not need to start with this sewing machine. You don't even need to start with the $500 sewing machine. You can start with the Kenmore that's been collecting dust, as long as you take it and go get it cleaned, serviced, and oiled, and you know how to use it. So if you can do that, you're good. You're all right. You don't have to spend any money beyond that to get started. And then once you see how much you like it and what you want to do yourself, that's when you make the decision on, do I need the one that's just for piecing? And that's fine. Maybe I'm going to send all my quilts off to a long armor, or maybe I'm going to purchase a long arm myself because I find that easier. I certainly do, but that's a whole nother price point and not for beginners. Or am I going to want to try and finish more stuff on my home sewing machine? And if so, the features that come along with a machine like this end up kind of paying for themselves over time. So the next thing we're going to talk about is fabric. You want to have quality fabric when you get started. We did a video, and a lot of people, probably the people who buy from big box stores, had a lot to say about this, but we did a blindfolded test on whether I could tell if something was quilt shop quality or something available in a big box store. And out of 10, I think it was, I only missed one where I couldn't tell the difference between what was big box store fabric and what was quilt shop. Some of them, they just feel terrible and they have zero drape because they're just so stiff. But the ones that felt good, the way I could tell the difference was holding them and feeling which one felt heavier. And even in the lightest fabrics like the Clothworks, which is printed on shirting fabric, there was still a sizable difference that I could tell just by feel that this one is big box store because it's lighter, so it's thinner. So there are different processes that are used when fabric is going to be sent to a big box store to keep the price down so that the big box store can make more profits, or be able to discount it significantly, because who pays anything for a price at Joann's? And usually it's on lesser quality cotton with lesser quality ink that's going to fade over time and not feel as good because it's not as good a fabric. And a lot of times, because of that, it doesn't behave very well either when you're working with it. I taught a beginner quilting class once. We were making a table runner. It would have cost like $20 to $25 for this woman to buy all of her fabric that she needed for the entire project, including backing fabric, at a quilt shop. But she showed up with fabric from a big box store, and it was trash fabric, just really trash fabric. And I can tell, like, I completely understand not wanting to start with the super expensive stuff with something you're not going to be super sure about. But this woman had the biggest problems with this fabric. We ended up having to spray starch the heck out of everything just to get it to retain its shape once it was cut so that she could sew it together. And we weren't doing anything difficult. We were doing a disappearing 9 patch, no triangles, no nothing, and this fabric just would not retain its shape no matter what. And I just remember feeling really bad because she had a $5,000 sewing machine and trash fabric, and she had such a hard time with it because the fabric was making it difficult for her. And at the end of the class, I said to her, I was like, look, you've had a lot of problems with this. The problem is the fabric. You need to just go spend your $20 here, get your background fabric and your 5 fat quarters, and do this again, and I promise you, you will have better results. And I have so many stories like that. Like when I taught at my guild and I did the triangle masterclass, and there was someone who was working completely with big box store fabric and nothing was staying to size when she was making her triangles. And I asked her, I was like, where did you get your fabric from? And she told me, and I was like, I think that's the problem, because it's just stretching way out. And so you don't want to be fighting with it, because even if you buy it at a big box store, that still costs you money. And you don't want to think, oh, I can't do this, when it's not you that can't do it. It's your fabric that's not cooperating. That's why on Quilt Addicts Anonymous, we have a free beginner quilting course that you can take. And if you take it, you get a coupon to go with that to get 20% off our beginner quilting kits, because we want you to be able to get started for about the same price as you would pay for the big box store fabric, but understand and get used to it with the good stuff to start. That way you're not fighting with it, you're not having trouble because of the fabric and something that can be controlled. We want you to have a good experience from day one, so that's why we have that there. There just is a big difference, both in working with it, the feel of it, and the finished product and how it wears over time. And so just go with the Quilt Shop Quality Cotton. You can always find sales, you can always find coupons like ours to get started with it, and you want to make sure you're ordering from an actual quilt shop instead of just going by the look of it and having it not work for you, both when you're putting it together and fading over time. So the next thing we're going to talk about is your cutting tools and your mat. So rotary cutters, if you're new to quilting, kind of look like a pizza cutter. And these are Olfa. They are kind of the premium brand, but they are 100% worth it. We use these significantly all the time here at the shop, and I've never had one break. But when I bought a Fiskars, when I was first started quilting, it kind of came like it's a pack with my ruler and my cutting mat. That thing was broken within a year. And I have never broken one of these. They're great and the blades are good. There are two main ones. The 45 millimeter blade is kind of the most common, and I think the best one to use for home use. There is the straight one, which is a little bit less expensive. When you pull it out of the way, the blade is exposed, and then you have to remember to shut it, which is super important because these blades are sharp and you can cut yourself pretty good with it. My husband and Bobby, who's our newest employee, who do not have quilting backgrounds, they like these the best because the fabric does not slip for them when they use this to cut. I prefer the ergonomic one, but I don't have problems with fabric slippage. But universally, anybody who has problems with fabric slippage, for some reason, like this is the best one to use. I prefer the ergonomic one because when I'm cutting, I'm doing a lot of cutting and usually smaller pieces to cut out a quilt. And it just works better for my wrist and everything to have the ergonomic design. Also, it kind of has its own safety feature. I can push this red button and then I can't squeeze that blade out, which is great because I've got little kids around. And then also it automatically, when you squeeze it, the blade comes out, and when you let go, it comes back in. So I don't have to remember to shut a blade. I can just cut and come down. And when I'm cutting, to avoid cutting myself or anybody else, I am constantly opening and closing this. Every time I set it down, I close it up. So to have one less step to do, like this is my preferred one to use. It is a little pricier, and everyone I know who's kind of a newbie or doesn't have that quilting background does have slippage problems where the ruler is moving on them with this one. But not with this one. I don't know why that is, but if you are able to go to a local place to try it out, that's fine. Otherwise, just start with this one and then maybe later upgrade to the other one. Or if you've got little kids around, just figure out how to master this one so that way you can put it in safety mode when you're done and nobody's going to get injured. So next we're going to talk about your cutting mat. This is really essential because otherwise you are going to ruin whatever tabletop you're cutting on. And you want to have a self-healing mat that will do really well for you. I have a giant one on the table right now. This one is 24 by 36, so it's perfect for working at a shop like this because we need to be able to cut yards at a time. It's really beat up here because we do a lot of cutting at the half yard mark, so that part's taking a beating. But this is going to be your more expensive mat because of its size. It's also going to be harder to store or take with you somewhere. The ones I like and the one that I have at home is 18 inches by 24 inches. So it's half this size. So it would cut off about here, but still be as long. That is great for home use. You can still cut like an entire fat quarter on that, and you can just slide stuff down if you're cutting yardage, and it stores a lot easier. So that is what I recommend for home use. You don't want anything smaller than that because any smaller lengthwise and you won't be able to fit the entire width of fabric on there. So that's 100% something that you want to go with. and make sure that you are at least getting that 18 by 24, but anything bigger than that is not super necessary to start with, and anything smaller than that will not work for cutting yardage or fat quarters very easily. All right, now we're going to talk about rulers, because this is what we use to actually cut the fabric once we have our rotary cutter and our mat. For the majority of my first several years quilting, I had 3 rulers and that was all I needed. I have a 6.5-inch square ruler that's perfect for cutting the smaller pieces from your strips. I have a 12.5-inch square ruler. You really don't need this unless you intend to cut either pieces bigger than 6.5 inches, like you have a really big quilt that you're working on, or t-shirt quilts. This is great for that. And I also have a 6 by 24-inch ruler. This is what you're going to use to cut all those strips from your yardage. One thing that I really like to do is I really like these Ulfa Frosted's rulers, because you can kind of, it like creates like a transparency or a filter over your fabric so you can see it a little better. But what you want to do is you want to stick with the same kind of ruler, because your eyes kind of adjust to reading this. So this is a different brand. This is OmniGrid. There's nothing wrong with this ruler. This ruler is perfectly fine. It measures great. It does what it needs to do. But I have for like 15 years been using Ulfa rulers. So whenever I look at the OmniGrid ruler, my eyes have a harder time figuring out where it is that I'm supposed to cut. There's nothing different with it. It just looks different, and it's got these bright yellow lines, and it's not the frosted. And so it just isn't the same for me. And I always take longer when I have to cut with this ruler than when I'm with the ones that my eyes are trained to read. So I would recommend going with the same brand once you find one that you like. The other thing you don't need are specialty rulers that are only going to be for one project. There are a lot of companies out there where they've got a pattern out, and you can only use their ruler with that one pattern. And that's a waste of money, in my opinion. Unless you really, really love the pattern, like who wants to add another $20 or $30 on for a tool that you're never going to use again once you're done with that quilt? My rule of thumb for whether I'm going to get a specialty ruler or not is how often I think I'm going to use it afterwards. So for example, this is the Clearview Triangle Ruler. It is an equilateral triangle ruler that has a point on all 3 sides. Some of them don't have the point up top. That's important if you're doing any equilateral triangles or diamond patterns. You have to look and see what kind of ruler they want, whether it's one with the point or without. But I love making 60-degree diamond and triangle patterns, and about every 3rd month, we design one that has this. So we have dozens of quilt patterns that use this ruler. So if that's something where you see it, like say you love our patterns, and you really like the look of all the 60-degree diamond and triangle patterns, and you want to do 2, 3, 4 of them, then it's worth getting this ruler, because you're going to be able to use it again. But if I had one pattern I wanted to do that needed it with a point off, I probably wouldn't do it, because I'm not going to buy a ruler just for that one project. Another good example is I have a friend who loves Jaybird quilts, to the point where she has a spreadsheet of every single Jaybird quilt pattern, which one she has, which one she's made, which one she's made multiple times. Jaybird is one of those pattern designers that has specialty rulers that can be used mostly with her patterns. They can get used in a couple other creative ways, but they're specifically designed to go with her patterns. If you are an enthusiast to the level that my friend is, it makes sense to buy every single one of her specialty rulers, because she's going to use them time and again. This is another specialty ruler that I purchased in a class with Marty Michelle. I always wanted to do a maple leaf log cabin quilt. I did it. We have a pattern for it. And when I was in the class, she was brilliant marketing. She gave every one of us one of these, and we got to use it for the class. So we got to see how lovely it is when you're cutting out your strips. But I think I got about 4 blocks done in class, and I was going to do a king size quilt. So I could see the value in purchasing this ruler to make my life easier when I was cutting out everything for all of the other quilts. So, and I've used it time and again. Anytime I'm cutting log cabin strips, I pull this out because it just makes my life easier. It's got both 1-inch and 2-inch pieces, so it works for a lot of stuff. So if you see one where you're like, this would make my life easier, I'm making this quilt huge, it's gonna save me so much time, or I could see using this again and again for other patterns other than just hers, then I think that's worth buying. But do not get suckered in by every single specialty ruler that can be used for one quilt only. That's so not worth it. Next, we're going to talk about thread. You want to find a 100% cotton thread that is as low lint as you can possibly find. The reason why you want it to have low lint is because the more lint that's on your thread, the more fuzzies that get in your machine while you're working it, the more often you have to clean it at home and get it serviced. So you want a thread that is not linty at all. I use RFL 50 weight for every single piecing that I do. I also use it if I'm quilting on my home sewing machine or making bags or something like that. I have a rainbow of colors, but I only use the rainbow when my threads are going to be visible. So something like garments, bag making, quilting the quilt. So actually doing the quilting where you're securing all your layers together. When I'm piecing my top or doing anything that's not going to be visible, I just use pure white, light gray, or beige. So that way I don't have to have a specialty color every single time I do it. I can just have my RFL 2021 and I'm good to go. I can use it on everything. This is my favorite. It's a very lint-free design and it works great. It is kind of on the expensive side. It is about $14, but there are 1,300 meters on each spool. So it takes a long time to go through one of these and it's worth every single penny. A couple other ones that you might see out there are going to be like dual duty. I found these to be super, super linty. These make a ton of fuzz in my machine and I have not purchased new ones in a very, very long time. This is from the Ben Franklin and this was purchased. Ben Franklin has been closed for maybe a decade around here. So this is not a recent purchase. It's not something I would use in sewing quilting today. I would maybe use it for like a top stitch if this was like the perfect one for that. This is not something I'm going to piece my entire quilt together with, or quilt it for that matter. Other things are you want to make sure that you are using the correct kind of thread for quilting. So like this one's white, but this is jeans thread. So this is something you're going to use with a jeans needle and heavy duty fabric. This is not something you want to piece your quilt with or quilt it. This is elastic thread. It actually is stretchable. And so this is something you would want to use with a knit. It is not something you would want to use with your quilt. So you just want to make sure you're getting the right thing for the right application. And this is, I believe it's 100% cotton, but this is an antique spool of thread. I'm not going to use this in anything modern because things do break down over time. And so this is not something I would use in my sewing machine. What I would do with that is add it to my collection of antique threads. So this is something I look for whenever I'm in an antique store. I want the threads. And it's super dusty because it's not been on display for a while, and it's my favorite when I can find a wood spool of thread. Don't sew with it though. Never sew with that stuff. I guess the biggest takeaway on thread is if you have a super linty thread, it doesn't matter if it's super cheap, because it's going to make you have to then get your machine cleaned more often because it's going to get lint all over on the inside. So you might save money on the back end, but then you're going to spend more in having to clean it more often or possibly having things break because you were not using a quality thread. Next, we're going to talk about pins. There are all kinds of pins on the market at different price points. And what I really like is, one, you have to make sure you're using it for the right content. This one here, it's a T-pin. It might be something that you see pretty commonly. I only use these when I am pinning a quilt to the really thick canvas on my long arm leaders. This leaves a ton of holes in your quilt because it's so thick. You don't want to have that for your like everyday piecing. You just want it to be like for heavy duty industrial type stuff. There's also glass head sewing pins. There's ones that are meant with ballpoint needles that are meant for special occasion. What I really like the most are these flat flower head pins. They go in really easy and they also slide out really easy. You can just grab the flower and pull it out. This is what I use for all my quilting projects. We have them available on the website and I just really like them. I think it's sold in a pack of 50. I would start with no less than 50. You don't really need more than that unless you intend to leave pins sitting in something for a really, really long time. You need to get more. But I would start with 50 and that's going to be good to start with. And you can always add on more later if you want to. Last but not least, you're going to need an iron. You've got to press when you're sewing, and there are different levels of iron. There's irons that are specifically made for sewing and quilting. There are irons that you can get for 10 bucks at Aldi. And I'm here to tell you that if you have the budget for it, the Oliso is amazing. So the Oliso has what's called iTouch technology. So anytime you touch the bottom of it, it's going to go down, and then when you let go, it's going to come up. This is really awesome for a number of reasons. One, you're able to leave the iron always down in this position, and you don't realize how much of a strain it is on your arms of like picking and setting up the iron until you're like having to do this at home because you didn't have that one. And it's just it's awesome. And then also it kind of changes where the center of gravity is, so it makes it a lot more stable. This is really hard to knock over when it's in this position. It is really easy to knock over when it's in this position. And it's got a ton of settings on it. Mine is almost always on the cotton linen setting. And when I use that in combination with my felt pressing mat, it just gets the flattest seams, and it's just beautiful. I love it. It's so great. Now, this has a price tag of something like $160. I need to get a second one. So I have one for here and one for home. But that is not a price tag that you probably want to spend when you're a beginner. When you're a beginner, it is perfectly fine for you to use whatever you already have in your house. Or one time when I was opening our brick and mortar shop, which is not open anymore, but when we were opening it, there was a deal at Aldi in the aisle of shame for $10 irons. And I went and bought 2, and those irons lasted for like 2 to 3 years. So, and that's with almost daily use, both from what we were working on in the shop for samples from students, things like that. And they worked really, really well. We got way more than our $10 out of them. The Oliso, this is my second one that I paid my own money for. They're not paying me to say this. The first one I got for free. That one lasted 7 years before it died on me. So you can get your money's worth out of this one as well. And the results that you get with it are absolutely fabulous, but don't think that you need to go buy a special iron just because. If you're looking to get that extra like flatness, or if you're doing something with a lot of points, this is a really good one to have because you are going to get the best results, especially if you press your seams open and you use a wool pressing mat like this. But wool pressing mat, I don't even think you need that to start with. I iron at home on my ironing board that I got at Target. And while this is awesome, it also works just fine on my cheap Target ironing board at home too. The one thing I do, whether I have a cheap or expensive iron, is I do not put water in it. Every iron I've ever had, whether it's expensive or cheap, if I put water in it, eventually gunk spits out of it. And then it's always on white fabric and it always ruins everything. So to go with your ironing, whether it's cheap or high-end like this one, I highly recommend dumping out all that water and instead going with a spray mister like this one. What it does is you fill it up with water and it turns it into an aerosol mist when you spritz it. So when you spritz it on your fabric, there are no water droplets on it. There's no like really wet spots. You can just spritz your seam, then go over it, and you end up getting a fabulous, fabulous joint. So no matter what, Nifty Notion Spray Mister, they're awesome whether you have a cheap or expensive iron. We don't sell the Olisos. Go straight to their website to get it if you want to upgrade to something like that. I have used Reliable. I've used other irons like this, but this is by far the best. Do not go with a travel Oliso. I don't think that's worth the money, but this one is absolutely fantastic. If you want to spring for something, any wool pressing mat is fabulous. It kind of pushes the heat back at the fabric and you get really fantastic results no matter what iron you're using. But if you're combining it with your spray mister and your Oliso, those blocks are going to be flat as flat can be. Well, quilting is not an inexpensive hobby to start because you do need a few things to get going. You need that sewing machine, you need some quality fabric, you need quality thread, you need cutting tools and a rotary cutter and rulers and mat and good pressing supplies, pins and needles, things like that. But like I said, there are levels to all of that. You do not have to go out and buy the most expensive sewing machine. You don't have to buy any sewing machine if you have one that is functional and you know how to use. Just get it cleaned up, make sure it's working right, and you can start with that. I do recommend going with that quality fabric and thread. You don't need all the rulers to get started, and you can, there's different levels of everything. So make sure that you look at your budget, you look at what you can afford, and you go from there and upgrade as needed. You may find that this is the best thing ever. It's amazing. You want to quilt all your quilts on your home sewing machine. So I want to get the more expensive sewing machine, and I want to make sure I've got like my studio outfitted with everything. There are people who have entire rooms and basements dedicated to their quilting hobby and craft. I'm not kidding. Entire basements completely dedicated to this. I know someone who bought a giant house with a giant master bedroom, and that was her quilting room. Was the giant, huge master bedroom was just all her domain, and everyone else slept in the secondary bedrooms, and including her and her husband. So people love this stuff. You can accumulate a lot of things when you're quilting, but you don't have to start that way. So I hope this video was helpful by giving you what you do absolutely need, the different tiers, and what you get for the different tiers. So I hope that was helpful. If you have been a quilter for a long time, pop in the comments of some things that you think are absolutely necessary and things that aren't. Or also things that are worth the money splurging on and things that you can get away with just spending, the bare minimum on. I would love to hear what your thoughts are too. All right, until next time, happy quilting.